everybody. Thank you so much for being here. I'm so happy to be with you today. I'm just going to share my screen real quick. And Amber, I just got a message from a deaf person who's watching on YouTube. So if you want to keep interpreting, that would be awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much. So welcome to Engaging Everyone, Best Practices for Accessible Volunteer Management. Oop. So a little bit about me. My name is Jules Good. I use they, them pronouns. I am late deaf, so I lost pretty much all my hearing as a teenager. And I also have other disabilities. I am a volunteering junkie. I have been a huge fan of doing community service for funsies since I was a kid. My parents really instilled the importance of volunteering and helping other people out from a young age. And so I've really enjoyed getting to volunteer for tons of different organizations over the course of my life. I'm finishing my Master in Public Policy at the UNH Carsey School. Graduation's on Sunday, yeehaw. And I am also, my day job is the Communication Access Coordinator at Northeast Deaf and Hard of Hearing Services. So we're a small nonprofit in Concord that serves the deaf and hard of hearing community across New Hampshire and also in some other parts of the region. And I'm the founder and consulting lead at Neighborhood Access, which is an accessibility consulting firm that works with organizations to help them make their presence, practices, and processes more accessible to people with disabilities. So we've been in operation for a little over a year now, and we're really excited to have the opportunity to bring trainings and presentations like this out into the world. So a game plan for today, we'll go over a little bit of background and disability history just because it's fun. We'll talk about why accessibility is important. Then we'll talk about accessible volunteer recruitment, so letting people know about volunteer opportunities and getting them involved. Then we'll have some time to be in breakout rooms so that we can all kind of work together and kind of chat through what you've learned so far and kind of apply some of that. Then we'll talk about volunteer and civilian engagement. Civilian seems like a really formal word and sounds kind of militaristic, but what I mean by that is like people on at your volunteer site who are not volunteers, so like the public that you're engaging with. And then we'll have another team time session just to kind of absorb all of that, and then we'll wrap it up with some insights and questions. While I did designate the end for insights and questions and just some kind of general discussion, if you do have a question, if there's anything I can repeat, if there's anything you need clarification on, please use the raise hand feature, which is located using the reaction button on the bottom bar of your screen. And then I'll take your question at an appropriate time at the end of a slide or something like that. So a little history. If you have not watched the documentary Crip Camp on Netflix, I highly recommend it. It was Oscar nominated. I think it should have won the Oscar for Best Documentary Feature, but that's just me. And it is a really engaging and comprehensive history of the disability rights movement in the United States. And it follows these young disability activists at this camp for disabled youth back in the 70s and kind of follows them on their journey through becoming the people who ultimately got the Americans with Disabilities Act passed in 1990. And so it's a really incredible film, highly recommend. So something to note about history of the disabled community that really impacts us still today is institutionalization. So back in the day, there were still disabled people, but people didn't know what to do with them. And they thought that disabilities were some kind of moral failing, or it meant that you weren't fit to interact with society because you didn't look or behave the same way that other people did. And so unfortunately, what happened was a lot of disabled people got basically locked away in institutions. And so all of the wonderful innovation that happened throughout the 20th century basically happened without disabled people being out in the world and engaging with that innovation. And so the world that we know now was built without that population of people in mind, which is why so many things are inaccessible. Another little media recommendation for you that talks a lot about this, if you're interested to learn more, is a book called Mad in America by Robert Whitaker. This mostly talks about institutionalization of people with mental health disabilities, but it really does apply to the disabled community at large as well. So I'm sure most of you have heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. This is the set of laws that protects the disabled community in the United States, and basically is supposed to ensure that we don't get discriminated against. Unfortunately, it is not comprehensive. You know, it was passed in the 90s. There's been a lot of technology and updates in society since then, and the law hasn't really been updated to reflect that. And so just because a place or a service or a product is ADA compliant doesn't necessarily mean that it is accessible to people with all kinds of disabilities. And so we really want to make sure that we're collaborating with disabled people in order to create solutions and not just relying on what's written on a 31-year-old piece of paper. And you'll hear me say the word disabled, you'll hear me say disabled person. I refer to myself as a disabled person. I absolutely respect that other people prefer person first identification, so saying a person with a disability rather than identity first, which would be a disabled person. However, I ask that you respect my choice to use identity first language for myself. A lot of my peers use this language as well, so that's kind of just my default. And I really don't think that disabled is a dirty word. It's become a beautiful culture and community of people. And so it's kind of what, you know, unites all of us. And so that is why I use that language. So why should you make your volunteer engagement accessible? Other than that, like, it's the right thing to do, it makes you feel warm and fuzzy inside, all of that good stuff. Disabled people are everywhere and we care and we want to get involved in stuff, right? Just like anybody else. And when there's access barriers to volunteering or to even learning about volunteering opportunities, it's very difficult for us to get involved. And so it leads to a lot of us being excluded from those opportunities and missing out on opportunities to engage with the community. And the other point I want to make is that there's way more of us than you think. The CDC estimates that somewhere between 20 and 25% of Americans have some kind of disability. And a lot of us, when we think about the word disability, we think people who use wheelchairs. But disabilities can be both visible and invisible. They can encompass all kind of aspects of human functioning and everyday life. And so I encourage you to keep your mind open to the fact that if you're looking at somebody and you say, they don't look disabled, they might have a disability that you just can't see at first glance. So we're going to move into talking about recruiting volunteers. So in the digital age, I'm sure a lot of us are recruiting volunteers using social media and the web, right? We post about events that we need volunteers for. We post links to places to sign up for volunteering. And so we want to make sure that when we're doing that, we're posting in an accessible way. So this is a really, really brief overview of something that takes a little bit of practice. You will receive a short document that will serve as a checklist that you can use when you're creating social media posts, so that you can make sure that all your posts are accessible before you send them out into the world. So the first thing is captioning. If you're posting a video, you should caption it. That way, people like me who are deaf and hard of hearing can understand what's going on in the video. Image descriptions. So people who are blind or have low vision sometimes will use software that's called a screen reader. And what a screen reader does is, as you scroll over text on a screen, it reads that text out loud to the person using the software. When you have an image on Twitter, for example, if you post a picture, when the screen reader scrolls over that picture, if there's no image description, it will just say, yep, that's a picture. And you'll have no idea what's going on there. And so we add image descriptions, which are also sometimes called alt text on Twitter. It depends on the platform you're using. They kind of use them interchangeably, so that you can describe what the image, what's going on in the image, basically. And in the next slide, I'll show you a quick example of an image description, just so you can kind of get a feel for what that looks like. The other thing to note about screen readers is that there are some document formats that that are not compatible with them. So PDFs, unless you go through a bunch of fancy processes to do what's called remediating them, if a standard PDF is typically not accessible to screen readers because it will see the document basically as one big picture. And so if you can offer alternative document formats to PDFs, such as Microsoft Word files or plain text files, then that will ensure that people who are using screen readers have full access to the text in the document. Another thing to note is with hashtags, we want to use what's called camel case. So this is another thing for folks who use screen readers. When we have a hashtag, obviously there's no spaces in hashtags, right? So if we type in kind of standard grammar where we just capitalize the first letter and none of the other letters, the screen reader will just read that as a series of random letters because it has no way to distinguish between the words. And so what we use camel case, which means capitalizing the first letter of each word so that the screen reader can distinguish between each word. So for example, at the bottom here, you see that I have hashtag this is awesome. If I didn't use camel case there, the screen reader would spit out something like thesis-oism or something totally incomprehensible. And so using camel case just makes sure that people can fully understand the content. Another thing is content warnings. This might not be something that super applies to you, but you never know. Sometimes we make flashy videos or we use GIFs that have really fast animation or strobing lights or other kind of flashy features. You just want to make sure that you put a content warning for content like that, because some folks can have neurological conditions that are triggered by that really rapidly moving graphics, such as epilepsy. It can trigger a seizure in somebody, and we don't want that. So if you just put a short little content warning, so you would write CW, stands for content warning, flashing image, then someone will know like, oh, hey, maybe I should not watch this video, or I should skip this part of the video. And again, I know I'm blowing through this, but all of this will be available to you in a document that you'll receive after this session. So don't feel like you have to like feverishly take notes. One thing I do really want to note is that you should put accessibility details on your event page. This goes for things that you know are going to be accessible, as well as things that you know are not going to be accessible. So let's say you're having an event at a park, and you know, you're distributing things from some stage at a park, right? And the stage is not wheelchair accessible. There's only stairs to get up there, or there's only a ledge to get up there. There's no ramp. You want to make sure that you let people know that, because if a wheelchair user comes and they're expecting to be able to participate, and they get all the way there and see that there's no way for them to get up to the stage, for example, then that's really disappointing, and they've wasted all this time driving there, and it's just a very frustrating experience. So just be aware of the access issues that a space can have, and we'll go over more what those look like in a little bit, and just put a short description of, these are the access tools we have available to us, this is what we're missing, plan accordingly. Any questions I can answer about social media accessibility before I move on? All righty, we will keep it moving. So this is just a quick image description example. So you can see this is a picture of me, and the image description I would use to describe this is a selfie of a person. They're looking down into the camera. They're wearing a black shirt, black hat, brown glasses, and a rainbow and star pattern face mask. There's a tan brick wall behind them. Now, this is a really pretty detailed description. Some people really have fun with their image descriptions and will really describe like, oh, the person has a graceful expression on their face or whatever. You don't have to do that. You just have to say, this is approximately what's going on in the picture. So you could even simplify this to, this is a selfie of a person. They're wearing glasses and a face mask. There's a wall behind them, the end. And that just gives somebody using a screen reader a general idea of what's going on in the image. Virtual events. So, you know, hopefully we're kind of moving out of having everything be virtual events in this COVID time. But I do want to stress the importance of providing a virtual option when you can. So if you're having a gala, for example, if your organization's having a fundraising gala, and there's going to be speakers or performances or whatever, it would be very awesome for a lot of people if you could live stream that content. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, you know, we live in a very old part of the country, and a lot of the buildings and the spaces that we have available to us to host stuff are unfortunately not accessible all around. And so giving somebody the option to participate and understand what's going on at home by streaming that content makes it so that you can get more people involved, and so that you can get more people excited about your mission and what you're doing. And so when you are doing virtual events, there's a few things to keep in mind. One, you should always provide a dial-in number. So when you make a Zoom link, for example, there's like the link that we all click on that pops up Zoom on our computer. And then there's also an option to dial into the meeting using your cell phone. And the reason we want to provide that is for people who use relay services, such as a video phone, which connects them to an interpreter to interpret the audio that's going on. That will allow them to connect with that interpreter. So if you don't have the phone number, then there's no way for them to do that using their video phone or other relay services. If you're having any videos, slide decks, other visual components to your event, if somebody requests or give people the opportunity to request that you share those materials in advance. One, for people who use screen readers unfortunately don't work over Zoom because Zoom doesn't see this as text right now. It sees it as an image because it's streaming a video. And so it's great for people with screen readers, great for people who might just need a little bit more time to read stuff and want to kind of get an overview of what's going to be going on ahead of time. And for people with visual processing disorders, which is very much kind of a similar thing. When you're speaking after someone, especially in an event with lots of people, you want to say, hey, this is Jules talking. And we do this for a couple reasons. One, it helps blind and low vision attendees because if they can't see your faces, it's very hard to distinguish between people's voices if you don't know them. And so just reminding people who is speaking can be very helpful. It's also really helpful for interpreters and captioners because they can then indicate to the person using those services who is speaking, and it just saves everybody a lot of confusion. If you are in a situation where you can take a 5-minute break every 30 to 45 minutes, that is really helpful for folks for a few reasons. One, especially in very lecture-heavy settings, sometimes things just go whoosh over your head, right? Like you're getting all this information like blasted at you and you need a little bit of time to process it. And so taking a little break just so people can think about what they've just heard or seen can be really helpful. It's also great for folks who have just all kinds of different disabilities. Some people have unique medication needs, bathroom needs, food and water needs, whatever that need regular attention. And so giving people the opportunity to take care of those things will ensure that they can more sustainably engage over a longer period of time. And the last bit is to set expectations. This is just really helpful to alleviate any anxiety folks might have about an event. It's also just kind of polite so that people know what's going on and they can plan their day a little bit better. And yeah, those are kind of the quick and dirty on virtual events. And again, there's a whole written guide that you will be receiving that has all of this information and more in it. So you will have that available to you after we're done. I'm just going to check the time real quick. Awesome. So we are going to head into breakout rooms, speaking of absorbing information. And I would like you to just introduce yourself to the folks in your breakout room and then discuss these two questions. One, how can we change our recruitment strategies to attract more disabled volunteers? And two, what's the first change I want my organization to make? I know not all of you are, like in manager positions at the organizations that you might be volunteering with. But just think about some things that your organization can do regardless. Maybe you can make those suggestions to the people who are in leadership. This is really just a time to envision how much more accessible your recruitment strategies could be. While we're waiting for folks to come back, would one or two people like to share something that you discussed? If you just want to use the raise hand feature, and I will call on you. Would love to hear, or not hear, but deaf jokes. Any takers? Who can I? Oh, Emma Brandt's a brave soul. Emma, go ahead.
Hello. One of the things that we discussed in our group was, well, we definitely focused on social media and how all of us wanted to be more inclusive on our social media at our various organizations, and a lot of us hadn't heard of some of the tips and tricks that you shared with us, so we really appreciated those. But one thing that myself and another person in our group mentioned was there are some elements to the programs that we need volunteers for that would preclude those with a physical disability from joining. I work at a conservation organization, and we often require sure-footed volunteers able to get in and out of sites over rough terrain. And so including more detailed descriptions of what volunteers would need to be able to do before, like during the recruitment process, to ensure that they are comfortable doing the activities we need of them would be something I think we need to work on.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that brings up a really good point, which is like, yeah, as much as I would love to say, like, you can make anything accessible to anybody, that's not true, because there are just certain things that certain people can't do, and that's okay. And so I think what's important is working with people to, have a conversation and just say like, hey, these are the typical aspects of this type of role. What is another way that we could get you involved? Here's what we can offer, and here's how like we might be able to have you do something else instead that's still like meaningful and still gets you involved with the organization. So fabulous. Okay, I just would like to, I wish I could hear from all of you because this is so fun, but I, alas, must charge on. All right. Our next little session here is the actual volunteering part. So this is going to be talking about what happens when you're like at a site doing the work, like getting your volunteer game on, okay? So before we dive into this, I want to talk about the platinum rule. So you probably grew up learning about the golden rule, which is treat others how you want to be treated, right? Which is like pretty good mantra, but unfortunately, a lot of times we make assumptions about other people based on what we would like to receive or how we would like to be treated. That doesn't necessarily correspond with how they would like to be treated. And so it's important to have a dialogue with people about their needs, their desires, their experiences. So the platinum rule is treat others how they want to be treated, not how you think they want to be treated. And going along with that, ask, don't assume. Just because two people have, like an identical diagnosis maybe doesn't mean that their experience is at all the same. And so, obviously don't ask like medically invasive questions, but if you're going through an experience with somebody and you notice that they might be struggling, you can just ask like, hey, what would make this easier for you right now? Is there something I can do that would help you be able to experience this more fully? And going along with that, every disability experience is unique. Like I just said, no two people are the same. Everybody is like a unique, beautiful snowflake. And so no disability experience is going to be the same. And you hopefully like maybe think about this already in terms of like recruitment, but view civilians as potential volunteers. And what I mean by that in this context is, if you are volunteering in a community and you're showing that you're like really making an effort to provide a good experience for your volunteers and ensure that they are, able to fully engage in the work, then other people are going to be like, wow, that's so cool. Maybe I could get involved with that organization. And so you just want to kind of model that behavior because people will notice it and they will be excited about it and will want to get involved. So one thing that's going to be a recurring theme for the rest of this session is aspects of an accessibility toolkit. An accessibility toolkit is like a little box that is filled with very inexpensive items that can help to ensure that volunteers are comfortable and safe and that you can adapt to needs on the fly. And this will become more clear as I go through the examples, but the point to make about this as well is that most of these items are multi-use. For example, a first aid kit, like you should have that anyway, right? it's good. It also provides a lot of items that are good for people with specific disabilities and conditions. And so these things are just things that are good to have anyway, but they have the added benefit of being super helpful in a pinch for people with all kinds of disabilities. So let's start with my favorite population, unbiased, deaf and hard of hearing community. So we'll just go through some tips for engaging with this population. One thing that's really important is to face people directly and speak clearly. A lot of us rely on lip reading to kind of inform the way that we process any limited sound that we might be able to hear maybe. And so when you face somebody, you're speaking clearly, make sure you're not mumbling, make sure you're not covering your mouth. That allows us to understand a little bit better. Another thing that you can utilize is the beautiful world of technology. There are two apps that I really like for transcription, which is basically voice to text. So you talk and it will automatically have what you're saying on the screen so somebody can read it. There's Otter, which is great. It is free with like conditions, but for like kind of, if you're not using it like every day all the time, you can get away with using the free version. And Live Transcribe, which is pretty much the same thing. Some people just have different preferences in terms of the layout and how it works. So those are a few options for you. I like to give options. Another thing that is important to know is a lot of people hear the word deaf and they're like, oh, they must sign. Well, I'm deaf and I do sign sometimes, but most of the time I talk because I'm in the very privileged position to be able to speak, which is the kind of dominant communication modality of the hearing world. And so you want to, again, ask, don't assume. Ask somebody how they prefer to communicate. They might prefer to sign. They might prefer to speak. They might prefer to write stuff down on pen and paper or type stuff out on their phone. So just making it clear that you are accepting of people's different communication preferences. Wave to get attention. Some people get really handsy with deaf and hard of hearing people, and they start like tapping them and like slapping them on the back or whatever to try to get attention. And that is very alarming when you're not expecting it. So to the extent that you can, unless it's like an emergency and somebody's about to fall off a cliff and you're gonna like grab them, wave to get attention. Try to like do a visual cue instead of touching. But if you have to touch, be gentle. Tips for working with an interpreter. This is something that's going to be included in some of the written resources I give you. But essentially the kind of golden rule to keep in mind with interpreters is they are there to help facilitate communication. So you are not, if you're communicating with a deaf person via an interpreter, don't look at the interpreter, look at the deaf person, because that's who you're talking to. The interpreter is just there to help them understand the message. I can't tell you the number of times I've been like out and about and people are just like looking at my interpreter and I'm like, hello, I'm here, you're talking to me. And so it is best practice to just keep that in mind. But interpreters are awesome and we love them. And I have many more tips for working with them and keeping them happy in the written materials. If you are in a pinch, and let's say you're like out and about, you are, you've got a deaf person who only signs, and you need to find a way to communicate with them, you don't have an interpreter handy. There is a service called video remote interpreting that a lot of deaf people are prepared to use. And it will basically allow them to dial in an interpreter to the scene via their phone or tablet or computer or whatever. And then they'll be able to hear what the other person is saying, interpret to the deaf person. And then there's also relay services, which is really more for telecommunication. And so there's all kinds of different devices and kind of just different ways of communicating that folks will use with relay services. And the only reason I say that is because, or the reason I bring this up is because if you are in a position where you're communicating with people over the phone, let's say you're volunteering for a campaign and you're phone banking, right? You might very well be contacting somebody who utilizes relay services. And what can happen is because with a relay service, you are communicating through a relay provider who is either typing or recommunicating in some way what you're saying to the person utilizing the service. So there's a bit of a delay while the relay provider does their thing, communicates that to the person, and then the person communicates back to you through the relay provider. And oftentimes what will happen is people will get hung up on because of that delay, because they're so used to people responding like immediately to what we're saying. And so if you're making a call and you notice a pause, there's a little bit of dead air, just keep in the back of your mind that it could be somebody using a relay service, and just don't be too trigger happy to hang up there. So in terms of items in the accessibility toolkit to have for deaf and hard of hearing folks, there's a few. Clear masks, okay? This is golden, okay? This is like the best thing I've seen in the entire pandemic. This is called a bend shape mask. Mine is kind of grody because I've been using it today. But it is a face mask. It is, you know, just as effective as the cloth face masks, to my understanding, for preventing the spread and transmission of COVID. But it has a clear panel so that people can see your lips and your face so that we can lip read. And so if you are volunteering and it's possible for you to get one of these are really, really nifty to have. And they are not wicked expensive, and they are multi-use because you can just, you can wipe out like the panel and it's very easy to clean. And so I definitely recommend, this is not an ad, I'm not being endorsed by Bend Shape, I wish I was, but very, very much recommend. Another nifty thing to have is just good old pen and paper, right? In a pinch, if you got to communicate with somebody who can't hear, write it out, show it to them, they'll write back, show it to you, good to go. And then the transcription apps that I mentioned, and both of those are free. And I'm pretty sure for like the majority of purposes, you can get away with using the free version. And so, yeah, those are very nifty to have. I do want to remind folks that if you have a question, just feel free to do the raise hand feature at any time and I'll get to you at an appropriate point. Because I know I'm chucking a lot at you, but feel free to ask questions, really. I won't bite today. So for blind and low vision folks, if you have print materials at your site, like instructions for how to do something, or materials that are being distributed to people in the community, it's really helpful to have large print versions. And all a large print version is exactly what it sounds like. It's a version of the document that is in typically between 18 and 22 point font, in a very easy to read font, and it has a little bit wider spacing than a standard single space document. It just makes it easier for things to be read by people who can't see as well. If you're working with a blind volunteer, it can be helpful to give a verbal layout of the area that they're going to be working in. So let's say that you're having them work a table and they're handing out literature for something. Walk them around the table, say like, here's where you're going to sit. This is the flyer that's here. This is the flyer that's here. These are the stickers that are here. Your other volunteer's name is this. Introduce them. Just give them a verbal layout of anything that might be important for them to know. And also instructions for how to like get to the bathroom or to the water fountain or any other essential features. And, you might not do all of that like right off the bat as soon as they get there, but just be prepared to kind of do that throughout the day with that volunteer. When you're approaching somebody who's blind or low vision, it's good to just announce yourself. Again, especially if you've just met them, they might not recognize your voice. And so just saying your name can be really helpful just so they know who you are. The blind and low vision community is another group of people that unfortunately abled people get handsy with for whatever reason because they think they need help. And so you want to make sure that you ask consent before touching anybody's body or any of their mobility aids. Again, the exception being if somebody is literally about to walk off of a cliff and you're going to pull them back and save their life, yes, please do that. But 99% of the time, it's best to say, hey, I noticed that you're kind of like veering off. Can I guide you back onto the path? Or, hey, like your cane is about to get lodged into this grate on the street. Can I help you guide your cane to the right a little bit? And just be very open in your communication with doing that. If you're having anybody use digital materials, like if you're having people check people in on like an iPad or collect information digitally. You just want to check the screen reader accessibility of digital materials. That's kind of a process. If you have questions about that for your organization, feel free to reach out to me. I can help you do that kind of one-on-one, but that's just something to keep in mind. Tactile assistance. So if you are, if volunteers are doing something where they have to distinguish between different items, it's nice to have tactile labels. So some people use Braille, which, you know, is the raised dots that you feel and make meaning of if you read Braille. Other people just use raised English lettering. So it would be kind of like an embossed, like cardstock card, where they could feel for the letters. And so those can be nifty in certain situations to create those. If you can avoid color coding, a lot more people are colorblind than one might think. And color coding can get really confusing if you cannot distinguish between colors. So if you can code things with patterns or with words or some other way other than color or in addition to color, that can be really helpful. In terms of the access toolkit for this group, a few things. A pocket magnifying glass, which is like a little magnifying glass that just kind of like folds up into a little circle so it fits in your pocket. That can be great to have on hand, especially if you don't have a large print version of a written material. You can lend them that pocket magnifying glass and they can, you know, kind of scope through and see it a little bit better. Hand sanitizer. The blind community really relies on touch for a lot of things. And so making sure that you have hand sanitizer on hand so that they can, you know, keep themselves and your surfaces clean is really nifty. And then dollar store headphones. For any digital stuff you're working with, if somebody's using a screen reader, then they're going to be receiving that information via sound. And, you know, usually people will have headphones and stuff with them, but just in a pinch, it's good to have some on hand just in case. Motor disabilities. So these are kind of a combination of different things. And the way that I'm defining motor disabilities here is disabilities that impact walking, sitting, standing, fine motor skills, really any kind of movement, whether that's like big motor skills like walking or fine motor skills like writing. So this is where it becomes really important to examine your volunteer site beforehand and be able to give people specific information about a few things. Stairs is an obvious one. You want to make sure that people can get where they need to go without using stairs. Uneven surfaces, again, we love our beautiful historic New Hampshire, but a lot of our pavement is more historic than it should be, which can be difficult for people who are using mobility devices to kind of move around. And if there's really high tables or shelves that volunteers need to access, consider moving those materials onto a lower platform. And of course, accessible bathrooms. Make sure you know where the closest accessible bathroom is at your volunteer site. If your site doesn't have one, but maybe the coffee shop down the street does, you know, maybe ask them if like, hey, you know, on this day we have a volunteer who needs an accessible bathroom. Would it be okay if they used your bathroom for this day? I've done this a couple of times with events that I've coordinated, and people are usually like more than happy to be like, yeah, that's totally fine. It's just a bathroom, whatever. And so it's all good. Really importantly, and this applies to everyone, talk to volunteers ahead of time and ask what they need given the layout or the situation at hand. So if you have a volunteer who self-identifies as having a disability, if you can talk to them, you know, a couple days prior to the event, just so you can kind of plan with them and say, hey, you know, this is what we've got. This is what we can do. This is what the area looks like. How can we make this the best experience possible for you? And just kind of try to integrate their suggestions as best you can. And again, some things won't be possible, but just be really honest with people so that they know what to expect. Another quick language note, really antiquated language at this point, but I still see people using it. People calling people who use wheelchairs wheelchair bound is not a preferred term in that community for a variety of reasons. So if you just identify them as wheelchair users, that's great. Don't touch people's mobility devices without consent. Don't try to wheel somebody around without asking them first. Just don't touch without asking. It's weird. And it's really, people's mobility devices are an extension of their bodies. And I'm hoping that you wouldn't just go pushing somebody around without asking them first. And so just apply that same principle here. Just checking the time. Okay, great. Toolkits for this group. This is more for, so a lot of the things that we talked about are more structural things for the site that you're going to be at. So you obviously can't like carry around a ramp with you everywhere. But the things that can be nifty to have in the toolkit are things for people who struggle with fine motor skills. So pen grips, you know, a lot of pens are really like skinny and it can be really difficult for people to grasp them. So if you remember maybe back in elementary school when you were learning to write and you had really bad motor skills because you were a child and they weren't developed yet, there were those cute little rubber pencil grips that you just slide onto the pencil and it gives you a wider area to grip onto and it kind of conforms to the curvature of your fingers. Those are really great to have on hand. And then bendable plastic straws. I know some of you work for environmental organizations and you're going to be like, are you kidding me? And I absolutely agree with reducing waste. Unfortunately, there just is not a great solution out there yet for folks who need bendable straws in order to drink. For some people, drinking a glass of water, because it requires, you know, some neck movement, some facial movement, and dexterity in the hands. For some people, that's not possible. And so having a straw really reduces the amount of motion that they have to do. And it really is the only way that a lot of people are able to drink liquids. And so just having a few on hand, you know, in case somebody, you have a volunteer at the site who needs one, is very nifty.
Yeah, it's bad.
Last category, or second to last category, I should say, before we get to the miscellaneous, developmental disabilities and neurodivergence. So neurodivergence is kind of a phrase that's been coined to encompass a lot of different, I think somebody might have their audio on, or is anyone else hearing that? If everybody could just mute themselves, that would be lovely. Thank you. So neurodivergence is, it encompasses a few different conditions. So ADHD, autism, dyslexia, dyscalculia, apraxia, a bunch of fancy words you don't need to know, but essentially conditions that impact the way that people's brains function, and that in turn impacts the way that they engage with the world. And so there's a few things that we can do to help folks with these types of disabilities. And again, this is a really, really like, I'm casting a wide net here. So this is one where people are going to have a lot of different needs and where you need to have a conversation to say like, hey, what do you need? What can I do? But these are a few kind of common things. One is plain language. So I feel like this is probably kind of rare, but just in case, if volunteers have to read documents that are like very, very fancy or legally or, you know, just written in language that isn't conversational, if you can have a plain language version of that text, that is super helpful. And all plain language means, it doesn't mean you're quote unquote dumbing it down, as I've heard some people describe it. It means that you're taking out the parts of the text that aren't absolutely necessary. So you're simplifying the metaphors, you know, you're kind of simplifying any of that super flowery, frilly language, just so that it's a quicker read, it's easier to understand, boom, everybody understands what they need to be doing, the end. Scripts can be super helpful. So if you have volunteers in a position where they're engaging with the public and they need to be communicating a certain message or guiding people to do a certain thing or what have you, having just some pointers of like, hey, this is what we're asking you to say to people, and just having that written out either in bullets or in a full script, that can be really helpful for folks. A lot of people in the neurodivergent community have social anxiety, and it can be really difficult to understand what to say without having kind of that guidance. And so that's just great to have on hand. Checklists, I can speak to this one. I have ADHD. I've had it my whole life. And it is very hard sometimes to stay organized. And sometimes if I'm at a volunteer site all day or something, and there's a bunch of things I need to do, I will be going ding, 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 from one thing to the next and forget something. So if you can have just like a clipboard, notepad, something handy where people can write down what they need to do and check things off, that is awesome. And it'll make sure that, you know, the things that need to get done. And that's great for everybody. Easy to read fonts. So folks with dyslexia, there are some fonts that are easier to read than others. And essentially what it comes down to is like, don't use wingdings, don't use like cursive, don't use something that is really, really decorative. Just try to use a really simple font like Arial or Helvetica, or something that's just like simple, easy to read letters. It's also helpful for folks to have space to decompress, particularly if you are in a volunteering environment where you're engaging with a lot of people, or if it is very noisy, or if there's a lot of stimulation happening. Having that space to just kind of have some quiet time can be really helpful and can keep people from burning out, basically, so that they can go for 5 minutes, take a deep breath, we're all good to go, come back and continue to engage. Things to have in the toolkit for these folks, disposable earplugs. A lot of folks are very sensitive to noise. And so if you're in a noisy environment, having earplugs can help people not to become overstimulated. And also fidget tools, which can be like anything really. Like I mess around with like paper clips, and I have about 1 million sticky notes that I folded up like this all over my desk while I'm in meetings and listening to stuff. And a lot of people mistake these types of fidget tools and such as not paying attention, but it actually helps people pay attention, because the way that I describe it, or how I experience it, is I feel like I have tons of extra energy at all times, and I get very distracted because of that. So if I can keep my hands busy folding something, or, you know, messing with some Play-Doh in my lap, or doing something that's a small movement that's not too distracting, then that helps me to focus on the topic at hand and what's going on. And so it's just nice to have those things around for folks, especially if you're doing like an orientation or a training where people are going to have to be sitting and listening for a long time. Kind of the miscellaneous category. So chronic illnesses really encapsulates a lot of different disabilities and conditions. But there are a couple kind of commonalities that join together chronic illnesses and also people who have allergies. One thing that is super important is to avoid really strong perfume or cologne or other scented products. A lot of people have conditions that make them very sensitive to that type of scent. And it can, you know, at best, like give them a headache, and at worst, like cause them to pass out or become extremely nauseous or something. So it's just kind of courteous if you don't know who you're going to be around, to just kind of use a neutrally scented product. I cannot stress this enough. Learn how to use an EpiPen or an AVQ or another antihistamine injector if somebody is having an allergic reaction that is causing them to go into anaphylaxis, which is, you know, where the throat closes up, they're choking, their face is red, they are struggling to breathe. It's just good to know how to do. There's a ton of videos on YouTube that like show you how to do it. The cool thing about the AVQ, which is kind of just like a different flavor of EpiPen, I guess, is it actually guides you through what to do. Well, okay, it's great if you're hearing. I can't hear what it's saying, but it verbally says like, okay, take the cap off, locate this area of the thigh, jab it in there, hold for 3 seconds, take it out, or whatever the instructions are. So that's really nifty, but it's just something, you know, hopefully a lot of us are maybe CPR certified or have had other first aid training. It's just good to have this in your back pocket so that if there is an emergency, you know what to do. Label all the things. It is, you just never know what somebody might be allergic to. You know, there's things that like we think aren't allergies or that aren't allergens, but somebody can be allergic to it. So if you're providing any food or, you know, yeah, just whatever you can label it in terms of the materials that are in it. And, you know, of course, the more common ones outside of food allergies is like latex. So if you're asking volunteers to work with a latex product, try to have a latex-free alternative. Like we use latex gloves in food service a lot. If you can have a nitrile glove or another latex-free alternative, that's great. A lot of this other stuff I'm going to breeze through. Basically, the important point is if somebody says that they can't do something, believe them. A lot of times what happens for folks who have chronic illnesses, if they're really fatigued, if they're having a bad day, if they're going through a flare, they will set a boundary, and rightfully so, and say, hey, you know what, I'm just like not feeling up to walking up that hill today, or I'm not feeling up to, you know, doing this other activity. And they are often met with pushback from people who are like, no, you look fine. It's probably fine. Believe in yourself. You can do it. If somebody says they can't do something, 99% of the time, it's not because they just like don't want to, or they're being lazy or whatever. It means they are having a hard time. Please have me do something else that is less taxing. So just, that's a good communication thing. Handouts quickly that you will get from me. So I already said the social media checklist. You will have there's a list of everything that I mentioned in terms of stuff to have in your toolkit that also has pictures and like the reasoning behind each one. So you'll get that, the virtual event accessibility guide, and then a guide on how to hire interpreters in New Hampshire. And I see things are happening in the chat, so I'm just going to check on that real quick. People are saying, yes, thank you, Amalia, for saying that. An EpiPen is not medical treatment. It just buys you time to get treatment. So you still need to take that person to the hospital if they are experiencing anaphylaxis, but it will slow down that process so that they have time to get to emergency treatment before something really, really bad happens. Okay, we are gonna do lightning round. Hold on, that's not what I wanted to do. Okay, we're gonna do lightning round 5-minute breakout room before we close out, just so that you have a chance to kind of debrief what we just talked about. So I would like you to chat with folks and talk about one thing that might be hard to implement, one thing that might be pretty easy to implement that you could like do tomorrow without a lot of trouble. And what is the first change in engagement practices that you want your org to make? So a hard thing, an easy thing, and the first thing you want to do. And I'm putting you in the breakout rooms now. All right, people are filtering back in. I know I wish I could have given you more time to discuss, but hopefully this entices you to have these discussions with people within your own organizations and you know, continue to talk about how you can make your practices more accessible for volunteers, because you will get a lot more volunteers to engage with your stuff if you are intentionally providing an accessible experience. So that is about all the time we have. I really appreciate you all joining me today and digging in and doing my breakout rooms and just being a fabulous audience. Like I said, you will receive lots of lovely little handouts, but if you would like to contact me, I'm going to drop my email address in the chat. It's just jules@neighborhoodaccess.org. Feel free to, did all the Bruces have a union? That's amazing. Could we, yeah, if you would like to check out our website, neighborhoodaccess.org, learn more about the services we provide. I would be happy to chat with any of you about working with your organizations in more depth. And yeah, I hope you all have a lovely day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.